Jake Davis and NhRP's Director of Government Relations and Campaigns, Courtney Fern. I'll hand it over to you both.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, now my dog starts barking, for joining us today. As Mickey said, I'm Courtney Fern. I'm NhRP's Director of Government Relations and Campaigns, and I am based in the Los Angeles area. So I'm really excited that we have finally filed our California case, and we can tell you more about it. I'll let Jake intro himself.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. As Courtney said, I'm Jake. I'm a staff attorney for the NhRP, and I'm based in Denver, Colorado.
So I guess I'll get us started. And sorry, my dog is just like staring at me and barking. I'll get us started. So as hopefully most of you have saw or seen and read, we filed last week our first case in California on behalf of 3 elephants that are imprisoned at the Fresno Chaffee Zoo, which is in Fresno, California. It's pretty much in the center of the state. We filed on behalf of all of the elephants who are imprisoned at the zoo, which includes Vismusi, who's an 18-year-old male African elephant who was born at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park in 2004. He was transferred to the Fresno Chaffee Zoo in 2015 when he was 12 years old, and he's been there ever since. His mother, Nadula, was one of the elephants who was brought from, at the time it was called Swaziland. They've since, the country's been changed its name to Eswatini. She was the first group of elephants who was brought to the United States, stolen from the wild, and brought here for the purposes of breeding. And she's been at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park since she was brought to the US. The other 2 elephants are a mother-daughter pair, Nolwazi, who's a 27-year-old African elephant who also is from Eswatini Lane National Park. She was brought with her daughter. I'm going to try to pronounce her name correctly, Amhale, who's 12 years old, again, an African elephant who was born in the wild. And Nolwazi and her daughter were brought to the United States, stolen from the wild in 2016. They initially were brought here and sent to the Dallas Zoo, where they were held for 2 years until they were transferred to the Fresno Chaffee Zoo in 2018. So what's unique about Nolwazi and Amhale is that they are newly captive. They were wild up until 5.5 years ago. And so they lived most of their life roaming freely at the Lane National Park with their matriarchal herd. Since they've been at the Fresno Chaffee Zoo, almost immediately upon her arrival, Amhale was diagnosed with EHV, which is a very deadly virus in elephants. If you looked at our campaign page, the Fresno Chaffee Zoo sort of flippantly talked about putting her through what they call restraint school real quickly so that they could properly treat her. We included on the campaign or the court timeline link to a PDF which shows exactly what she went through for this treatment, which includes being restrained. At least 3 of her legs were tied with ropes so that they could perform various medical procedures on her to ensure that she was, properly treated. Thankfully, she did survive. Since 2017, 3 elephants have died at Fresno Chaffee Zoo. Amy, a 30-year-old African elephant who had a torn ligament and was euthanized due to pain. Her daughter, Miss Betts, who was I believe she was 10 years old at the time she died of EHV. She actually is who most likely gave it to Amhale. And then Kara, who was a 42-year-old Asian elephant who was euthanized, I think due to lameness and osteoporosis conditions related to, or that likely come from captivity, being held in improper conditions. At the Fresno Chaffee Zoo, all 3 elephants are intended to be used for breeding. Zoo employees have stated that they intend to breed the elephants and hope to hold 4 to 8 elephants in the enclosure. At the Fresno Chaffee Zoo, all 3 elephants are held on a 4-acre area of land. About three acres of it is usable. It includes a pond. They have like a rock wall that has a like puzzle feeder. At times it has a waterfall feature when it's warmer. And there's also a concrete barn where they are held when the zookeepers are not able to look after them. And also when it's too cold or weather conditions don't permit them to be outside. So their days are very boring and monotonous. There aren't many enrichment items at the zoo for them to engage in, and nothing that comes close to meeting their physical and psychological needs. So I will turn it over to Jake to talk about our case.
Thanks, Courtney. And so if any of you have been following the NhRP's work for a while, you might have a general sense of the type of claim we bring in these cases. And this is no different. What we are seeking from the court in this matter is the single right to bodily liberty for all 3 elephants, which would require that they be relocated from the zoo to a sanctuary where they'd be able to exercise their autonomous nature. In other words, live a life as close to nature as they can in this country, live a life as close to their natural habitat in this country as they can. And in bringing this case, there was an exciting aspect in that we were able to get 2 new affiants to submit affidavits in our favor. They were Bob Jacobs, who is an elephant scientist, and who was the other one?
Bob Jacobs.
What's that?
Bob Jacobs.
Bob Jacobs, and who was
Keith
the second? Keith Lindsay, that's right, thank you. And so Keith Lindsay is also an elephant scientist. But what's interesting about the Bob Jacobs affidavit is that he actually works in neural imaging. He's a professor of psychology at the University of, at Colorado College, excuse me. And he's done a lot of work with the mind. And I just wanted to read one excerpt from his affidavit, which I felt was really compelling because in the past, our affiants have been able to speak to the effect that captivity has on elephants and other highly cognitive species of animals like chimpanzees, but we've never had an affiant really go into such great detail about the specifics of what's going on in the mind of these non-human animals in captivity. And so this expert, it doesn't get into the weeds per se, but I think it's a good recitation of what these elephants are enduring by being at the Fresno Zoo. And so I'm going to quickly read this passage. He says, in natural environments, the body's stress response system is designed for quick activation to escape from danger. In captivity, there is no escape. In captivity, animals have an almost complete lack of control over their environment. Such situations foster learned helplessness, which involves the amygdala and broad dysregulation of the neurotransmitter serotonin. Under similar conditions, stress is associated with a variety of neuropsychiatric diseases in humans, such as anxiety, mood disorders, including major depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Given the highly conserved nature of neural structures, brains have a lot in common across species. There is no logical reason to believe that the large, complex brains of animals, such as elephants and orcas, would react any differently to a severely stressful environment than does the human brain. So, in other words, if you think about what a human being might endure by being in an environment like prison, or even more along the lines of a solitary confinement, that is more or less what these elephants are experiencing in their mind by being at the zoo. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Courtney.
Yeah, I think, you know, if we want to open it up to questions, we can. I guess one thing I'll touch on quickly, it sort of goes with what Jake just said or read from Bob Jacobs' affidavit. You know, the Fresno Zoo, we have gotten some media coverage. We had a broadcast segment that aired in the Fresno area, and the zoo did issue a statement. And part of it was saying that the elephants have the ability to choose their social groupings, which I thought was a bit ridiculous because there really aren't many options. There are 3 elephants there. They don't have, if they were in the wild in a herd, there would be dozens of elephants for them to choose who to spend their time with, who to engage with, various social, types of social engagements that they can engage with. Bull elephants roam often after they, mature. They roam with herds of bulls. They also come and, can rejoin their matriarchal herd during mating season or other herds. And so to say that Vesmusi, Nolwazi, and Amhale have the ability to choose who to spend their time with and how to spend their time is absurd. There are 3 elephants. They're forced to spend their time with one another or to spend their time in isolation alone. There is no freedom of choice. There is no freedom of movement. There is no freedom at all at the Fresno Chaffee Zoo. It is the prison for them. And so I just wanted to issue my response to that statement. And with that, let's open up to questions.
Yeah, if everyone can please send their questions in the chat box on the bottom right, and feel free to ask any questions. No question is a silly question. This is the first kind of one of these seminars we're doing on this case, so I'm sure there's so many new things, so many new questions. So the first one was from Vanessa. I think one of you mentioned some pictures. Is there a place where we can see those?
Yeah. Our the case timeline does have a photo. I personally went and visited the zoo in December. I took a bunch of photos and we'll be releasing them shortly, but I will ask to see if we can maybe put together a photo gallery that we can release now. And we'll be launching a campaign page soon that will have a lot more photos of all of the elephants. When I went and visited the zoo, only Vesmusi was out. It was a rather cold day. So I think the other 2 elephants were being kept inside the barn. But we can send around photos and post them so you can see what the zoo or what the exhibit looks like, the types of areas that the elephants are held in. When I saw Vesmusi, they were doing a training session. They offer, it's like a public, I guess, like entertainment, they call it educational seminar, where they put him in a really small enclosure. It's about double the size of his body. There are bars around and they have him put his ear out, perform various sort of, they're not tricks. They're typically what they do to do wellness checks, but they're doing it for the public. They have him respond to various commands. And I observed him doing that. So we can put that out. We have a video of it as well.
Great. Yeah. And just in the meantime, I put in the chat box the link to their timeline. So you can see that for now. I don't think there's a photo there, but for now.
Also, I forgot to mention IDA in Defense of Animals this year it's for the first time they've been included, named the Fresno Chaffee Zoo one of the 10 worst zoos for elephants in North America. I think they were number 9 on the list, and this was the first year that they were listed.
And I'll pop that link in the chat box as well. Next question is by Nari. How are you? The question is Fresno Zoo the only zoo in California where you have 3 elephants in a 4-acre plot? And why was the Fresno Zoo specifically selected?
So, go ahead, Courtney.
So in terms of 3 elephants on a 4-acre plot, yes, I think so. Like the LA Zoo has there are 4 elephants. The usable amount of space is roughly the same as the Fresno Zoo, but they have 4 elephants. The setup of the elephant exhibit is different. At the San Diego Zoo Safari Park, there are, I believe, 12 elephants on 6.5 acres. At the San Diego Zoo, I think they have more than 4 elephants. I mean, they're similarly situated in terms of the amount of space that each elephant has.
Yeah, and I would just add that the reason that these elephants were chosen was for all the reasons Courtney mentioned, in particular their recent capture from the wild and import to American zoos. We don't think these are the only elephants who are unjustly confined in the state of California, but we had to start somewhere. And with zoos, you're never sure what they're going to do with the animals in their quote unquote care. And with a mother-daughter combination, we felt that that was a compelling narrative and important to try to keep those two together for as long as possible, especially if we were to be successful and the elephants would be able to be relocated to a sanctuary.
Yeah, great. Thank you both. So the next question comes from Fern, who asks, is it still legal to take elephants from the wild to zoos in America?
Unfortunately, it is still legal to take elephants from the wild. There was a recent capture and export of elephants from Africa to countries in the Middle East that received a lot of outcry. Until there is a law in place that mandates they cannot be brought here, countries can really do whatever they want as far as the species in their care goes.
Yeah, and as of, I believe it was last year, this wasn't to bring elephants from Africa or Asia, but it was a zoo in Texas, I'm forgetting the name, attempted to import elephants from Canada. So there still is, international trade of elephants happening between the US and other countries.
Okay, next question is from JJ, who asks, is this the same type of case that you have for Happy?
Yes, so it's the exact same type of case that we brought on behalf of Happy, although we now have a few more offhants. So we have a bit more science in our favor, and we're basing this case on California law as opposed to New York law. As far as the claim goes, though, it's the exact claim we are seeking for Happy's release, the right to bodily liberty.
Great. Okay, Philip asks, has there been any commentary from local Fresno citizenry regarding this case?
When the zoo was listed as one of the 10 worst zoos for elephants, it got a lot of sort of notoriety on social media from Fresno residents, and a lot of people expressed their displeasure in the zoo and them keeping elephants imprisoned. I'm not familiar with how much commentary has been made about our case. We do have a change.org petition that has garnered, I think it's close to 6,000 signatures now. And I'll be going through and running the analytics to see how many people are from the Fresno area. But as this case progresses and as we get more media coverage, and as the campaign moves forward, we anticipate getting a lot of support from people within the Fresno area. And Fresno is the fifth largest city in California. It's a pretty big city. So, there are bound to be lots of animal advocates there. And actually, when I went and visited the zoo for the first time, there was I parked, the parking space I parked in front of, there was a sign and someone had graffitied over it, "Do animals belong in zoos?" So there's at least one friendly person there.
And I'm sharing now the change.org petition that you just mentioned. So if anyone hasn't signed it yet, please jump on it and sign it and share it widely. Okay, so Bruce asks, bringing elephants from either Africa or Asia violates CITES. Why wasn't this confronted in 2016?
So there was outcry in 2016 when this import happened, just as there was outcry this year when elephants from Namibia were rounded up and sent to the United Arab Emirates. And I'm going to add a National Geographic article into the chat for reference. CITES, unfortunately, is not legally binding per se. So countries can violate the treaty and justify their violations with whatever means they feel are adequate. CITES, like most international agreements, is more advisory than anything. There isn't an enforcement agency that would go to Namibia or go to the ultimate destination of the elephants and bring the elephants back or stop the elephants from leaving in the first place. So until there are laws in these African countries or laws in the destination countries that prohibit the export or import of elephants, these African nations and the countries purchasing the elephants can pretty much do whatever they want, justify it however they want, and basically say, sorry, CITES, but we're just not going to listen to your advice this time.
And there was a really good piece in the New York Times by Charles Sieber about the um, legal efforts by animal welfare organizations to stop the import of the elephants in 2016. There was a valiant effort to prohibit them from coming to the US, but the zoos were able to circumvent it.
Right. Okay. Let me see. Vanessa asks, which sanctuary would these elephants go to?
They'd go, well, there are a few choices. Our first choice would be the Performing Animal Welfare Society, which is in the Central Valley of California. It's also known as PAWS for short. And then there's an elephant sanctuary in Tennessee, which we've also listed as a possible destination, although we prefer the shorter route for the elephants than having them sent from California all the way to Tennessee.
Great. Okay, and Karen asks, would it be possible to read the affidavit from Dr. Jacobs? If so, where can I find it? Actually, Karen, I can answer that question. I will pop it into the chat box right now, but it should be also on the client's timeline page on our website. So let me just do that for everyone. Okay, next question is by Courtney Scott, who asks, the zoo claims the elephant habitat is a safari-like setting. Do the elephants interact with other animals like giraffes, etc.? The zoo also claims it's 13 acres, I believe. So they must be including the entire area for all of the animals. Is that correct?
Yes. So they call it a multi-species habitat. It appears to be, the exhibit has been set up to be very appealing to humans. So it appears to be as naturalistic, I guess, as possible as a zoo, in that there are no visible fences between the various species exhibits. We found an interview with the architect that designed the exhibit, and there's like a pond separating the elephants from the rhinos, and there's like an underwater barrier that prevents either species from crossing. So even though it looks like they could potentially interact with another species, they cannot. They are confined to their portion of the exhibit. So visually it looks like it's one big plain, but it's not, and they call it the African Plains exhibit. So they are confined to, and like we said, it's 4 acres of space, but only about 3 acres of it is usable. So yes.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Dorothy asks, Fresno has a state university. Has there been any outreach to campus groups that support animal rights?
Yes. And I should say it's a little difficult right now just because the semester is almost over, but we do plan on engaging with the animal welfare organization at Cal State Fresno. It is interesting, the animal welfare student group there is tied with the agriculture school. So it's a lot of students who are learning on, or interested in animal agriculture, but those who are also concerned with animal welfare. So we will be reaching out to them. And the Central Valley is really huge. And Fresno is about 2.5 hours away from San Francisco. So in terms of, the type of outreach we can do, it's pretty wide. And anyone who lives in the state of California, your voice is extra important, but anyone can get involved in helping advocate for the freedom of the elephants. And I should note the Fresno Chaffee Zoo is privately owned and operated by a 501c3, the Fresno's Chaffee Zoo Corporation.
Okay. And this question kind of goes along with what you were saying, Courtney. But Nari asks, compared to the Bronx Zoo officials, how do you compare the Fresno Zoo officials with regards to this suit? Do you think they'd be more sympathetic, or is there no real difference?
We just got started, so I don't think we can really say. I think anyone will be more responsive than Jim Breheny, but who knows?
Yeah, and I'll just add that if the court was to issue the writ, which would virtually mean that the zoo would need to come before the court and justify their imprisonment of the elephants, which is an initial step in the lawsuit, we would send a letter to the zoo offering to settle the case without having to go through the litigation process. We do that in all of our cases, and we did that in New York, didn't get a response for it. And so that would really be the only time where we would get a sense of whether or not the zoo had the elephant's best interests in mind.
Thanks, Jake. And didn't you mention that in the last discussion we had that there was some ties to the Bronx Zoo in some way, or the Wildlife Conservation Society?
Yeah, the Wildlife Conservation Society is the governing body that oversees the Bronx Zoo. They also oversee an aquarium in New York. The specific name escapes me, but a former director of that aquarium, and Courtney, correct me if I'm misremembering, but a former director of that aquarium is now the CEO of the Fresno Zoo. And so having worked for WCS, he would be familiar with the NhRP. And so I'm sure that, as I said in the last call, when he left New York for California, he probably thought he was done with us. But surprise, we're knocking on his door all over again.
Okay, great. I think we're caught up on questions, but please feel free to keep asking any questions you have. We're more than happy to answer them. And while we're waiting for more questions, Jake and Courtney, can you give us a little insight into what happens now since we filed last week?
Yeah, I can take it from the legal standpoint, and Courtney can maybe speak to everything else that goes on. We are waiting for the court to make a decision one way or another. There's multiple options that the court could take on. So they could dismiss the suit outright, in which case we'd have to appeal the case. They could ask for the respondents, the zoo, to come before the court and justify their imprisonment of the elephants in an official capacity. They could ask the zoo to submit a writing justifying the continued imprisonment of the elephants, which is more like an informal response. And that would trigger then us to respond to that with writing. And then the court would ultimately make a decision whether or not it wanted to have an official submission by the zoo. So there's three options, more or less. And the timeline for that can range anywhere from tomorrow to a few months down the road.
And then from a campaign standpoint, right now, we really would like people to sign and share the change.org petition. As you know, once it gets a significant amount of signatures, it can have a lot of impact in helping sway decision makers, whether it be getting local elected officials to call on the Fresno Chaffee Zoo to send the elephants to sanctuary, or getting celebrities or other notable people to comment and support their freedom as well. And then soon we're going to be issuing action alerts for you to contact the zoo directly and ask that they send the elephants to sanctuary. So we're just letting the case sort of, its filing settle, and then we'll be putting out more action items for you to take. But as of right now, sharing the client page so people can get more familiar with our 3 new clients, as well as the change.org petition, is what, the most effective thing that you can do right now.
Yeah, thank you. So Bruce asks, what card do these zoos believe trumps the argument granting liberty to sentient beings?
That's a great question. And there's a number of things I imagine zoos believe trumps that argument. One of them might be that the zoo would maintain they aren't violating any welfare statutes, which is true and which is fine. This is a rights case, and we posit that the zoo is violating the elephant's fundamental right to bodily liberty. Another argument they might make is that the elephants are in the best care they can be in, and the zoo are the experts, which is ironic. Take, for example, Happy's case, where we had 5 or 6 of the world's most renowned elephant scientists submit affidavits speaking to how cruel and inhumane her imprisonment was, and how she should be granted the right to liberty and transferred to a sanctuary. And the Bronx Zoo, who works obviously with the Wildlife Conservation Society and employs elephant scientists themselves, couldn't get any of their elephant scientists to submit affidavits to counter that point, because at the end of the day, the elephant scientists know that captivity in this sense is horrible for elephants. Another argument along the lines of the welfare argument might be that because the zoo is currently an owner of the elephant, in other words, the elephant is their property, they can do with the elephant as they please. And we maintain along the same lines of the welfare counter argument that the elephant is not in fact their property. The elephant is its own entity with its own intrinsic nature, and that needs to be recognized in the granting of that right to liberty.
Another argument that's commonly made, and which statements the zoo has made, I think it was in response to them being listed as one of the 10 worst zoos for elephants, was that they serve as, the elephants serve as an ambassador for their species, teaching children who come and visit that it's important to conserve the species and, to learn about elephants, which is, there's no justification for imprisoning elephants and denying them of their liberty and their freedom. If children can learn about elephants in so many other ways. Most kids know so much about dinosaurs, but they've never seen a dinosaur before in their life. In fact, the Fresno Chaffee Zoo recently they might still have it, an exhibit on dinosaurs. So there's no need to imprison elephants to educate children or anyone about, the importance of saving, imperiled species such as elephants, and imprisoning them does nothing to help conserve elephants.
Yeah, and just a quick anecdote on that point. So there was a study done, and it spanned the year range of 1962 to 2012, and it found that 390 elephants during that span had died in captivity, just about all of them from captivity-related illnesses and ailments. And if you're able to read our California petition, we cite that article in one of our footnotes in the petition. So that kind of just goes to show, as IDA said in their list of 10 worst zoos, that elephants don't live in zoos, they die in zoos. And that's the case for just about all non-human animals who are in captivity. They're not living, they're simply slowly dying.
Heartbreaking. And just to divert quickly away from this case, Courtney asks, are there any future plans for us taking on cases for other elephants in California and Oregon?
So right now, our plans for our litigation is to hopefully win the case on behalf of Happy in New York. And if that happens, then go ahead and try to free the remaining elephants in New York State. Same mindset in California. If we can win this case, we're going to absolutely go ahead and try to free all the other elephants in California. We're planning to bring a petition on behalf of elephants in the state of Colorado towards the end of this year. And then after that, I can't say for certain what we will be doing. We will be considering lawsuits on behalf of orcas, but we won't stop our lawsuits on behalf of elephants. It'll just be a matter of which is the next state we'll bring a lawsuit in, and that is still being decided internally.
Yeah, a lot of things happening this year. A question from Fern. She asks, the Jane Goodall Act will be reintroduced to the Canadian Parliament. This will make the captivity of elephants and other wild animals illegal. Is there any similar law that may be introduced in America?
At the moment, no, not that I'm aware of. There's no federal anti-captivity ban that's being considered. There was Adam Schiff introduced in 2015 and reintroduced in 2017 a bill that would ban the keeping of orcas in captivity. The state of California has banned the keeping of orcas in captivity. So the ones at SeaWorld will be the last ones held captive in the state of California. The city of San Francisco effectively banned the keeping of elephants in captivity. They passed a law requiring that if there were to be an elephant held captive or any elephant held captive in the state, that each must have, I believe, 15 acres of land for them to have to themselves. So if you've been to San Francisco, you know it's an effective ban. And there are two cities in the state of California, San Francisco and Malibu, that passed. They're only symbolic, but resolutions recognizing the rights of orcas, dolphins, and other cetaceans to live freely in their natural habitat. So that went a bit broader than what you asked, but that's the extent of rights in the US right now for non-human animals and anti-captivity bans.
Okay, so Paula says, I thought a big problem is that the courts are resistant to recognizing non-human animals as persons. So she asks, are they afraid of the economic repercussions to animal using industries if they set this precedent?
I can't speak to the mindset of the courts outside of the decisions they've handed down, and those decisions really don't go into details of that nature. Now, we receive a lot of amicus briefs, which are briefs that parties not immediate parties to the case can submit to try to make a point that they think the court needs to consider. And a lot of these opposition amicus briefs make the argument that if we free one elephant, then all agricultural animals will be freed and animals can't be used for food or medical testing, etc. But we've always maintained that we're just seeking one right on behalf of one non-human animal, and that's the right to bodily liberty. Courts, of course, are hesitant to be the first to make this determination, just as courts during slavery were hesitant to free slaves based on very similar principles. So it's going to take a lot of courage for a court to make the right decision, even though we believe the law is on our side and our arguments are incredibly compelling for recognizing this right.
And Jake, I think another question for you from Joanne. She asks, if Happy is recognized as her own person on May 18th, would it set a precedent for the California case? Do you think Fresno will change their arguments for keeping these 3 prisoners?
Well, it wouldn't set a precedent per se for California, because if Happy is to win, that's going to be precedential only for the state of New York, but it'll absolutely be influential. New York's highest court, the Court of Appeals, is perhaps the most influential state court in the country. And so a lot of other states do look to its decisions for influence. If we were to win Happy's case, it would be such an incredible moment. I really can't say what the Fresno Zoo would do. But the Fresno Zoo may not even have to respond. If the court doesn't issue the writ, then we just get tossed out of court and have to appeal this all over again. So I would assume they would address the ruling in Happy's case, but to what extent, I can't say.
Right. So we'll see in about a week's time, or I guess it's longer than that, but.
Yeah, the hearing will be on the 18th, and then give or take 45 days before a decision, if the court takes its time.
Right. And Courtney, a question for you. Dorothy asks, can you give some background on the sanctuaries that are available for elephants?
Yeah, so there are 2 accredited elephant sanctuaries in the United States. Jake mentioned them. PAWS, the Performing Animal Welfare Society, which is located in Galt, California, which is sort of like halfway between Sacramento and San Francisco in Northern California. And there, the elephants have hundreds of acres to roam, freedom of choice and to how to spend their days, who to spend their days with. And then the Elephant Sanctuary in Tennessee, where it's a 2,300 acre elephant sanctuary PAWS has other species that they also provide refuge to. The Elephant Sanctuary in Tennessee exclusively provides refuge to elephants. And so there's that sanctuary as well.
And some time ago, we did a Zoom seminar. Courtney, I'm blanking on the name, with PAWS director.
Oh, Catherine Doyle.
Catherine Doyle, that's right. We did a seminar with her where she took us through what it's like to be an elephant living there. So I can share that in the chat box as well if you want to watch that at some point. Okay, so Bruce asks, is it possible to converge the argument against property as was necessary to eradicate enslavement?
Yeah, another great question. So without getting too much into the weeds of the legal theory behind our arguments, I would just say that the right we are seeking through habeas corpus, the right to bodily liberty, is the same right that abolitionists sought on behalf of various slaves during the slave era. And so we do draw analogies between those cases and our case. And I think I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Jake. And just going off topic a little bit, Karen asks, is there any news or any updates on Minnie at the Comerford Zoo?
Unfortunately, no, there are no updates. I have an outstanding FOIA request with the USDA to get any records that haven't been made publicly available. The last time they did an inspection of the Comerford Zoo, I believe, was in September, and Minnie was still there. Just so I can still keep doing it, there are other ways for me to keep track of Minnie. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to confirm that she is, what her status is. But we have no reason to believe that she isn't alive and isn't at the Comerford Zoo. So we believe she's still being held captive there on their Goshen farm. They're currently, I think today might be the last day for it to be passed, but there's a bill pending that would prevent the Comerfords from using, or anyone, it's a Traveling Animal Act entertainment ban that passed through part of the House in the Connecticut legislature. And I believe today is the last day for it to be passed or for it to die during the session. But we're hopeful that it will pass. And if it doesn't, we'll support it when it's reintroduced. In the summer, we'll be doing more in-person direct action type events in Connecticut for Minnie.
Thanks, Courtney. Okay, so Robert asks, what is the consensus of lawyers as to releasing, let's say, Happy, but it would be to a sanctuary outside of the US? Will you ever see that in the future for any of the elephants in the US?
So in Keith Lindsay's affidavit, he mentions that if Amachle and Nawalzi could be released to a sanctuary in their native country, that would be wonderful. But the truth is that is an incredibly arduous journey for the elephants. And the two accredited elephant sanctuaries in America, PAWS and the Tennessee Elephant Sanctuary, really are wonderful, wonderful places that allow these elephants to maximize their intrinsic nature. And so I'm not sure it would make the most sense to send the elephants as far as, say, Brazil, when the sanctuaries in America can provide for their needs. But if there was any way for these elephants, especially ones that are recently captured and know how to survive on their own in the wild, to be sent back to their native habitat, we would certainly press for that and run that down with our elephant experts.
Yeah, and I think just to touch on that, that's something we also considered. We asked the experts, especially with Amhale and Nawazi, if rewilding was a possibility. Since they are recently captive, they spent a majority of their life living freely in East Watini. That's something we would love to have happen if it was possible, but it's, the most feasible thing would be for them to be sent to one of the sanctuaries in the US.
Yeah, definitely. And just while Courtney and Jake were talking, I dropped the link to the Catherine Doyle interview in the chat. So feel free to watch that to get a glimpse of what it's like to live in a sanctuary for these elephants. And Bruce asks another question. He says, as you certainly must reflect, should legal arguments fail, what other societal avenues are open to advocates to pursue?
Courtney, that's probably.
Obviously, legislation is, that would, it takes a very long time, especially with rights. With any new, social change, it takes a really long time to get decision makers to see, the harms that are being done and the right way to achieve the appropriate end result, which in this case would be to recognize the rights of elephants so they no longer are held captive in the United States, and the ones that are currently held captive here, for them to be able to send to a sanctuary where they can, regain as much of their autonomy as possible. So, working, if you live in a jurisdiction where you think that, lawmakers, if you think your city might be open to this, please contact us. We'd love to start working on legislation like that. With respect to the Fresno Zoo, I think, we're going to start putting out action alerts for you, ways that you can contact them and contact elected officials in the area. An interesting thing with the Fresno Zoo, it used to be publicly owned. And in, I believe it was 2004, 2006, they transitioned to a private ownership. They transferred the ownership of the zoo, but there is a tax measure, Measure Z, which, a certain percentage of a sales tax supports the zoo. And there's a county zoo commissioner authority that oversees the distribution of those funds. So there is a public element, oversight element to that. So I think contacting the agency that oversees the disbursement of the funds would also be effective, and we will be putting out ways to do that and sharing on social media, our normal routes.
Yeah, social media, email, and if there's any other panels that everyone here thinks that we should be on, please let us know. We're trying to spread the word as far and wide as possible. So,
and I think something too, we're very fortunate, at least for California, there are several staff members that live here. Mickey, not to disclose your location, Mickey's here. I'm here. Monica Miller, who is arguing Happy's case, lives up in Northern California. So if anyone who lives here, wants to host an event to, inform your friends or colleagues or anyone within your network about the work that we're doing and the work that we're doing on behalf of the Fresno Elephants, we are more than happy to participate, whether it be in person or virtually. If it's virtually, Jake can participate. Now I'm volunteering him. But, anything you want to do to help share, that's a great way to, to have like a informational event, or if you work somewhere where you think your colleagues would be interested in learning about the work that we're doing and how your company could help this fight, that's another possibility. So there are lots of things. I think just making people aware about the issue of non-human animal rights, why welfare is not enough, and then specifically about our clients, their plight and the fight that we're making for their freedom. I think just really getting people informed on this issue. And we've seen how important that is in Happy's case. I mean, I feel like every month since we filed in 2018, it's grown and grown and grown. And, in the past 6-7 months, we've been covered by these huge esteemed publications like Nat Geo, Time, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, and it would be great to have something similar happen with the Fresno Chaffee Zoo and, the elephants that we're fighting on behalf of. So just spreading the word, making people aware about what we're doing is the most important part, because building that huge coalition of, just everyday people who support this is critical, and it shows the court takes notice of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just dropping in the chat my email address. So if anyone has any suggestions or ideas or anything like that, please feel free to email me, and we can chat further. And Stephanie, I see you had a question about those photo video submissions for the Free Happy campaign. We've extended the deadline, so feel free to keep submitting your photos or videos through the form, or you can just email me, whatever works best for you. And I think we're almost time to wrap up. So any final questions you have, please drop them in the chat box. And Jake, Courtney, if you have any final things that you want to mention.
No, I just want to say thank you so much for joining this talk. You know, I think it's these, you know, Vismusi, Nolwazi, and Amhale are in desperate need of being free to a sanctuary. They suffer every day that they're deprived of their freedom. And so it's critically important that everyone do what they can to spread the word about our fight for their freedom. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. And I'm happy to give you ideas of what else you could do. And in the upcoming weeks after Happy's hearing, we'll be sending out new action alerts for how you can help be a voice for our Fresno clients. But until then, just share the Change.org petition.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to attend this conversation. It goes without saying, but don't go to zoos, and try to keep family and friends from zoos as well.
And I'll do one, it's not Fresno related, but one plug. Next week is Happy's historic hearing. And we're holding a pre-hearing rally outside the courthouse in Albany, where we'll be gathering to show our support for Happy's freedom. Steve Wise, president and founder of NhRP, Monica Miller, who is arguing Happy's case, and other NhRP staff and attorneys will be speaking at the rally. And then if you can make it into the courthouse, you can go watch the hearings, although seating is very limited. But if you're in Albany or in the area, please come and join us. We need as many people as possible to show support for Happy's hearing. And of course, success in Happy's hearings will translate into, it'll just be great precedent, even though, as Jake said, it will just be influential for our case on behalf of the Fresno Elephants. And then we also will be airing the court's live stream of the arguments on freehappynow.com. Sorry for taking away from this, but.
Oh, no, that's great. Yeah, if you can't join in Albany, it will be online. So please save that link, freehappynow.com. And we're going to squeeze in one last question. It is about Happy. For Jake, Robert asked, does Happy being the first in the mirror recognition test carry any weight or not?
It's a nice anecdote, and perhaps it'll be influential to somebody on the bench, but at the end of the day, we know what the nature of elephants is based on the affidavits from our elephant scientists. So had she not passed MSR, or had another elephant passed MSR, and we still brought the case on behalf of Happy, we feel that our arguments would be just as strong.
Thanks, Jake. Final question. So Vanessa asks, how do we get future updates and Zooms? Please sign up to our website. Our mailing list. That's where we'll always have updates and Zoom invitations. But if you're following us on social, we do updates there too. So on Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter, I think we're most active on. So please follow us on those. And yeah, I think that's everything. Thank you so much, Jake and Courtney, and thank you everyone for joining us. If there's any questions that I missed, I'm so sorry, and please feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer them or pass them along to Jake and Courtney to answer. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Bye.